Hey there, and welcome to the Confident Woman Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Brooks. Join me as I sit down and chat with co-hosts, friends, and carefully curated guests and talk about all the things that empower you to become your best and most confident self. So, let's get started. Hey, so we are so excited. So today we are sitting down with Annette Chesney, and she is just going to wow you guys. We have so much to talk about, obviously, prior to us hitting record. So FYI, we've been talking at some length here, and we have some juicy topics to bring here. And you know what? I'm just excited for today's conversation. So I'm going to pass the mic off to Annette and let her kind of share a little bit more about her as well. So welcome, Annette.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. And I've so enjoyed talking with you. And now I'm really excited to have this conversation with your audience as well.
Oh my goodness. It was like, for context, those who have not yet been on our podcast, we usually take a few moments just to kind of rev up our vocals, get some of those jitters and those nerves out, and just have a really just beautiful introduction. But our 5-minute warm up turns into almost the entire episode length, but we are coming at you because we had such a great conversation that the time spent, I said, you know what? I want to make sure our listeners hear this. And so today's conversation, we're going to be talking about, becoming your best self, really taking that lead in domain of our entire life, and that leadership of how that we can really become our best selves and those roles that we play. So of course, we got lots to talk about. So I'm going to let Annette kind of share a little bit more about that conversation, but also more about you and your story and kind of how you came into this leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this goes way, way back. I'm many moons old at this point. And so back in the day, I spent about a decade and a half in vocational ministry. And it just so happened, just the way God worked this out, the person that I was working for as part of the church staff, he was a licensed therapist and had launched a support group ministry. And then he was also in charge of all of pastoral ministries, which means like all the care elements, for members of the church and everything. And as I was involved with him, more and more, I started like really watching what was going on and got involved with the support group ministry. And he came to me at one point and he was like, "There's a calling on you. Do you not see it?" And I was like, la, 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 I can't hear you. I can't, because I had an idea of what that meant. And I thought, yeah, you don't know my story. Like, I'm disqualified for this kind of stuff. And he goes, no, you're not. And of course, since then, I've learned that the things that we think disqualify us, when we put those in God's hands, those are the very things that qualify us, as he turns it around, because now we can speak into issues with a depth and with an authority of someone who's been there, done that, understands it, can spot it at 100 paces, and can speak deeply into the real issues associated with that. And so I really love that. And before long, I was actually leading that area. And then, and just involved with the counseling center and doing a whole bunch of things. And then I went from there to a second church. And so there was like another 5 some years there where I launched ministries from scratch. Anything that wasn't worship team or children basically fell under me. So on top of me dealing with certain issues and dealing with the heart, and of course, working on myself through that whole time, I also had to learn leadership, because I was needing to, recruit volunteers and raise people up and train them. So I was like, holy cow, I knew that I had a natural leadership bent to begin with, but that wasn't enough. So then I dove into learning leadership, and I learned a whole bunch of things, trial and error. And then I started coaching people and raising them up into leadership roles and everything. And then so combine that with what I learned with the whole emotional healing and with the work I did on myself through that time, I began to see how crucial it is for anyone who's in a leadership or influencer type capacity, whether that's you're the influencer with your children or you're the influencer in a professional capacity. It's crucial that you deal with yourself first, because if you don't, it leads you on a whole different path. And any mistakes you make are amplified, toward other people. And you can really hurt people when you don't mean to, just out of your own insecurities or whatever. So I am real big on dealing with ourselves as we move into leadership, or if we are leaders, we have to deal with ourselves at a deeper level, even because now our leadership is moving to another level, so I'm just very, very passionate about all this.
I could tell. And it's interesting because leadership is, I think sometimes it could get a little bit cloudy because we think of like leaders as being the strong, authoritative, like, follow me kind of stuff. And, maybe that's just the way I envisioned it, because maybe that was the leaders that were mentors and models to me. So I really didn't understand the context of leadership, but I love how you're putting it in that framework where it's like, it's beyond you. It's not just about, get behind me and follow me wherever I'm going to go and do it my way. And interesting enough, and this is something I was just looking up recently, just in my own like curiosity, the different styles of leadership, which I thought were unique, because as I understood the different styles, it also helped bring down some of those barriers of what I thought leadership was. And leadership is it's something that I don't want to say that we do or we don't have it. Like you said, we're leaders in our life in some capacity, whether we're, a mom and we don't realize it, but we are leading our children. If you're a wife, you're also leading your partner as well. And so like, there's different formats of leadership, but I think, when we come down to it, and I just want to just share kind of the 6 different leaderships, or actually it was 7 leadership styles that I came across, which were democratic, transactional, autocratic, bureaucratic, laissez-faire, servant, and transformational. Now, I don't know if that's for everybody. This was just of my own Google search of my own curiosity. But the one that really stood out to me, I was like, ooh, I am a leader. And it wasn't the ones that I thought I had to be. So that one really brought almost like, I'm a leader. And it was a weird thing to say, but it brought some of that clarity. So as you kind of go through these leadership attributes and characteristics and define those for what you are and who you are and the roles that you're called and qualified for, you are essentially being, elevated to that next tier, which is to lead others. And, leadership, it could be something as simple as leading the person that you were yesterday. Somebody's going to be that version and need that version of you. So that's leadership as well. So this is an interesting topic. So I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, because I'm going to be learning a lot. And I know that you're going to be sharing a lot with our listeners as well. But I'm curious to know a little bit more about, the leadership aspect, how you've kind of framed it for your own life as well, but how you also help individuals develop and cultivate and lead their own lives.
Yes, for sure. Self-leadership is where it all starts. We deal with ourselves. And I've always loved that aspect of it, because everything else falls in place when we deal with this. And so I went through a season where I was dealing with I used to coach a lot of men and women, both, on these issues. But then I kind of was narrowing it down to women. And then I actually shifted my messaging to be specific that this is for women. And I was getting a lot of women who were small business owners, and they were struggling. And they caught themselves self-sabotaging, and they realized they were doing it, but they didn't know how to stop it. And every time they saw a goal on the horizon, something in them would rise up, because there was a spark in them. They were go-getters, and they would want to reach for it. But then when they would reach for it, they would implode. And this cycle was happening over and over with them. And I became known as a sort of a breakthrough coach, because of the combination of skill set that I had, I understood the business aspect, but I could also deal with the heart and get down to like what's driving behavior, what's really going on there. And as I was talking with these women, who, by the way, their confidence was so eroded, their belief in themselves was so eroded, that they had reached the point where now they're expecting to fail. And as I unpacked what was going on, too many times I found that there was narcissistic abuse in their background. And I could spot that because I had been through it myself more than once. And I knew what it did to me. And I knew what the process I had to go to get myself out of that pit and to rebuild the confidence and to, fan the little spark in me that was still there, but was just so exhausted, and trying to overcome these things. And if you're not aware of this stuff, whether it's narcissistic abuse or other hurts, it could be, going through a tough divorce. It could be, feeling like you failed at goals one too many times, and it's taken the wind out of your sails. It could be something from growing up that gets embedded as a certain narrative in your head that is so counterproductive that who you truly are is constantly at war with that message. It could be any number of things, but when you're in any sort of, John Maxwell says leadership is influence. That's all it is. It may not have the title of leader on it, but we can influence people for good or for bad, either way. And whether it's for good or bad depends on our own self-leadership, and how we're going to move forward. So, I like to take a look at these different issues of the heart. And when I work with women to unpack their stories, to see what's going on, to see where they've got some false beliefs or assumptions about themselves, and then to go, what's the genesis of that? Like, where did that come from? And a lot of times there's woundedness in the heart, and being go-getters, like we tend to be, that we kind of try to stuff that in a box and put it on a shelf and pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and soldier on. And all we wind up doing is being like the walking wounded. We're moving forward. We're maybe even accomplishing some things here and there, but we are not firing on all cylinders. We're getting by, we're being okay. And we may have gotten so good at that unless someone truly knows us, we can put up such a good front and we can still get accolades from people, and no one really knows that maybe we've got 8 cylinders that we could fire on and we're only firing on 4 right now. And that just becomes a way of life. And I think that's tragic. That is truly tragic, because there's so much more that we have to offer the world and that the world needs, or, at least our circle of influence needs. We're meant for more, and we're not meant to remain status quo. And it shouldn't be so hard. We shouldn't be having the air sucked out of everything we're doing that we feel like we're trudging through. And that's what happens if we don't deal with some of the underlying issues.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, some of the stuff that you were just sharing I feel like it's hitting me in real time. Just some of the stuff that Annette and I actually connected and bonded over were some of those issues that she had just shared. So without sharing, too much of that personal information, this is really speaking to me. And, I found myself in a season just as of lately, like, to be honest, it was last year. I found myself in a place where my confidence had felt eroded. And then in creeps that imposter syndrome. It's like, how do you keep showing up as the confident woman on all your stuff? And it's like, because I'm confident in just leading and living my best life. But that best was like 1% each day that I could give. But it was something that kept me going, because it was something that I knew was beyond and bigger than me. And whatever I was going through this was actually going to help me get through it. So this podcast, this platform has been incredible, because the amount of people that I've been able to connect and converse with, and, all the women that have come in through my life this past year have helped heal and restore myself. So this is fresh off the press here, but it's, sharing those little bits here and there. This really speaks to me. And, when we talk about the issues at the heart, it's so true, because we're wounded. We are wounded individuals. And as much as we could say, well, we haven't had something major happen in our lives, it doesn't have to be what they call like the small T and the big T of trauma. It doesn't have to be something catastrophic. It's those little paper cuts over time. And eventually it just builds up where it's like, no, those were still traumatic, because nobody should be cut in any way, but yet still recognizing that we're all carrying some sort of hurt, some sort of pain, some sort of did me wrongs. And it's like, we need to learn to unpack that, because eventually through leadership, it's like we're, as you said, self-leadership, as we're leading our own selves through this healing process, we don't know indirectly that people are still, they're watching, they need this, because you don't know the impact and influence that you'll be leaving and making on others as well. So I love that we're having this honest conversation and, unpacking some of the issues of the heart. And I'd love to hear some of what those are. And so we can expand upon those as well. So somebody's like, I think this is me, but I'm not really sure. So we're going to dive into that.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And let me just preface this. We're going to, there's like 3 big ones that we can talk about that are easiest to spot the symptoms. And there's some like overlap between these. But let me just preface this by saying that there is no shame. And if you recognize this stuff, like, I respect the ones who step up and say, yep, I've dealt with that, that, and that. And yes, I'm struggling with this now, because I can work with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it. And to be honest with you, in my experience, my own personal experience, and the women that I've worked with and others that I've talked with, the ones who are able to make the greatest impact are the ones who have walked through the valleys themselves.
Yeah.
And if they handle it right, they'll emerge on the other side of that better than had they not had those experiences, So there's a scripture, I'm sure you're familiar with it, that talks about, God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. I truly believe that. I have seen that pan out in real life. So the things that you think are the most negative things, the most shameful things, the things we try to hide from others, those are the very things that, as you come out of that and you get the healing from that, you can speak with authority deeply into certain issues. You have more compassion, you have more understanding. You're such a better leader overall because of the depth that you've gained by walking through those valley experiences, So let's take a look at this first one, this heart level thing, and we'll just talk about some of the symptoms. Sometimes that's the easiest way to know, is this sort of bubbling in the background? Now, first one is anxiety, which is just like a more acceptable way of saying fear. Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean you're weird. We all deal with this at different levels. So some of the ways it shows itself is like fear of rejection, for example. And when we're dealing with fear of rejection, that's where we get caught up in people pleasing, and we have a hard time taking a stand, like on a conviction, taking a stand, holding the line, having your opinion, your conviction about something philosophically or whatever, and, stay in the course. Going through that doesn't mean that you're not open to other opinions or anything, but trusting your gut, basically, that you can move forward instead of constantly doubting yourself, and being able to speak up. When our confidence is eroded, we shrink back, and we fear, because if we're this fear of rejection and the anxiety and everything overall, it shows up in our confidence level. We're afraid of being exposed. We're afraid of, once that imposter syndrome stuff starts showing up, like you were mentioning, we do shrink back. We don't step into opportunities. We're more likely to be quiet. We're sitting in a meeting with everybody. We have something to offer in that meeting. And instead, we'll just stay zipped, because we're afraid if we speak up, what if someone doesn't agree with me? What if this or that? So we never bring who we are to bear in the situation, and the more we do that, the more our confidence erodes. The more our confidence erodes, the more we do that sort of thing. And if we're okay within ourselves, if our hearts are healed and whole, and we know who we are, and we're comfortable in our own skin, then this whole fear of rejection thing can't grab a toehold within us. Doesn't mean we won't feel it, but it won't shift our identity, and what we say to ourselves. Same thing with boundaries in our life. We won't hold the line on boundaries, because if we've got a fear of rejection going along, we're afraid if we tell someone no, or disagree with them or whatever, that they will turn around and reject us and move away. So what we will do is we become this chameleon. We'll shift who we are. We'll shift what we believe in. We'll open the door to things that our gut is telling us not to. And we can get ourselves in a whole lot of trouble with that. Yeah. The same thing with stepping up with, confrontations. Not all confrontations are negative. Sometimes we have to have certain confrontations, and if they're handled in a healthy way, then issues are resolved, or you emerge better. The relationship is stronger on the other side of that. You gain more understanding of each other. It doesn't have to be bad, but if we fear rejection, we're not going to have those healthy, constructive kind of conversations.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So many of these that are just really sticking with me. I mean, on a personal note, but also from what we hear from so many of our women in our community, just women we meet. It's like, when you start to hear the common thread through everything, you realize now the struggles, although they're unique and personal to you as you're going through them, but they're not as unique as what it feels like, because others have had these experiences and they're all struggling with them in some capacity. And it's like, who hasn't people pleased at some point? Who
Mhm.
hasn't, you know, felt difficult, standing up or speaking out? Who
Mhm.
hasn't had that awkward, weird feeling like, oh, I have to confront or say something, right? Or hold in those boundaries. I think we've all done this in some capacity. And it's like, as we continue to see how we're showing up in those areas, that maybe there is that underlying issue that is
Mhm.
something that needs to be reassessed or, reevaluated. So I think that as we look at it, it's like, oh, well, somebody can say, well, I don't have anxiety, but we do, right? Because
Mhm.
I mean, it's kind of hard in this world not to. I
Mhm.
mean, there's so much that it's fear, 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 right? Everything you turn on
Right.
the media to social media to taking that big leap into your, calling, or, what's lurking behind that corner in the shadows of our own past that we have maybe tried to outrun. It's like we're all living this, but yet we don't really know how to speak about it. But then sometimes, as not even that, but sometimes, how do we move forward through this?
Mhm.
And that's some of the challenges, is where we find our individuals getting stuck, is in navigating through that. Like,
Right.
yep, okay, you could be nodding and, yeah, I have that. Yeah, I experienced that. Yeah, this is
Mhm.
me. So now what? What's next?
Right.
So these are, this is obviously what you do with the work that you do, is
Mhm.
you empower those women, you help coach them, you lead them, you guide them. And so
Mhm.
what are some of those, you know, obviously we'll go into strategies a little bit in later here, but what are some of the other, the resistance, like once they've already come to, yes, this is me,
Mhm.
what's next? How do we just empower that woman to take her first step, or to ask for help, or speak up?
Right. Yeah. And I'm so glad you pointed, like, we all deal with this, whether it's the fear of rejection, fear of failure, just being afraid of being embarrassed, which ties into those first couple things. Control freaking.
Mhm.
We can get into control freak, and a lot of people don't realize that there's a fear
Mhm.
that's driving that. And the whole people pleasing and all that stuff we mentioned. All of that, it's like multiple sides of the same coin, of this fear issue. And so looking at symptoms and being able to put a label on it where we identify it, that's a good start, because the worst thing we can do is just try to, well, I'm just going to suck it up and I'm going to press myself forward and I'm just going to rise above this. I'm going to overcome it. Yeah, to a degree, because these are common human experiences and they're not all bad. Sometimes it's the very thing that helps us to become better. And I would expect that you'd have some anxiety when you're stepping into like a new zone in your life, or a new level of something with your business or whatever, of course. But if it becomes crippling to us, like if we are on the point of a panic attack when faced with having to speak in front of a room or make a presentation or whatever we're doing, that should be like a red flag waving that this is more than just the normal sort of jitters, because it's a little out of my comfort zone. Out of the comfort zone is good because we grow. That's how we grow. But when it becomes paralyzing, when we're kicking into fight, flight, or freeze, that's the red light on the dashboard of the car telling you there's more than meets the eye. We need to look beneath the hood a little bit. So, just talking through some of these symptoms, maybe the best thing we can do is acknowledge it, own it, and say, time out. I need to back up and let me just unpack my own heart a little bit and look at what's really going on here. Where does this come from? What is this situation reminding me of? Sometimes that helps to connect the dots. Whose voice am I hearing in my head? When fears crop up, sometimes, I've worked with people and they'll realize, oh my gosh, every time I'm faced with this, I hear my mother's voice in my head
Mm.
criticizing me, whatever it is. You can't go through life without having some of this stuff going on. And, my goal in working with people is not just to help them suck it up better, and achieve their goals in spite of that, but I'm all about getting free from it.
Mm. Yes.
So then you can run forward and you can enjoy the journey. You can look at life as an adventure instead of a threat.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I'm over here like, yeah, you hear your mother's voice, you hear your own voice, you hear that jerk one time, and it's like
Right.
they repeat. So it's like, yeah, these different voices in our heads, and then sometimes it's so hard when there's so much noise and it just sounds like chatter, and you just cannot at some point discern who's who. And
Mhm.
then somewhere in there is your little piping whisper, like, hey, don't believe that. Hey, don't believe that. And it's like,
Right.
you try to tune in and you wonder, like, you almost become dismissive of that. And then also our own, like, internal, like, knowing our spirit led voice.
Mhm.
And how can we move forward then if we're just bombarded by all these lies and fears and stories and narratives and remarks and criticism? And sometimes, like you said, it just becomes crippling and paralyzing that we shut, instead of
Mhm.
moving forward, we shut out and shut down. When we sometimes numb in different ways, we bury ourselves in
Mhm.
distraction, we bury ourselves in work.
Yep.
Yes, we become very
Mhm.
busy trying to outrun
Exactly.
what we are not giving time and attention to tune in and listen. And when we do, we can start sorting through and deciphering whose voice is what and what bucket they live in. And then you can start unpacking and sorting through and organizing in a way that feels so empowering to you, because now it's not about what they're all saying, it's about what you're choosing to hear.
Exactly. Exactly. Because we can be chased by ghosts and
Yeah.
don't even realizing how we're being driven by that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and it shows up in different ways for different people, but it's huge. It's huge. And it really does suck the life and the love out of what you're doing, because now you're trying to avoid, maybe a fear of punishment or embarrassment or exposure. And instead of challenging ourselves and enjoying being challenged and like, getting like, woohoo, out of
Yeah.
when you step out of your comfort zone and you try something and being okay with trying something and failing. Like if we're not okay with that and we never challenge ourselves and we only take the safe things that we feel like guaranteed to accomplish, that right there is the red light flashing on the dashboard. Because again, you have more to offer the world than that. And it's tragic if we don't. If we live our lives hiding in some form or just being self-protective, I mean, what's the world missing?
They're missing you, the unique gift that you are here for. And one of the points that you had mentioned, and I kind of want to just piggyback off of what you had shared before, was, there's a level of where you can be pushed out of discomfort, but when the pain becomes unbearable because you're being forced into something you are not. And I just want to
Yes.
kind of go on my little soapbox here for just a half a second
Mhm.
and share this, because I had experienced this also, this, as I'm trying to heal a lot of my stuff in my life. But something that came up was like, I don't know if it's like toxic positivity, or it's just like, oh, well, you just keep doing the thing because you know what? It's going to help you grow and get outside your comfort zone. And it's like, maybe their intent is well intended. However, you as the individual need to discern and say, hey, listen, this is for my own protection. Like, I know that if I were to go beyond this limit, I know how I can get, I know where it will go. And I also realize that that's not for me. And so sometimes advocating for yourself and vocalizing that, because otherwise somebody else would just keep pushing you towards the thing that's called growth and stretch yourself. And, you only live once. It's like, mm, knowing yourself gives you so much power, because you won't be derailed or detained in somebody else's agenda. Because that is when we look at self-sabotage, this is a way to self-empower and reclaim that power. And so there's a lot of times that we will just sabotage ourselves anyway, and then throw in somebody else in the mix and they'll double down on that. But it's like, where are you at this point in your life where you can say, no, this is a hard no. And it's not because you're resistant to growth or change, but what happens after that. Because when we get to those limits, that's it's like the hot stove. We
Yep.
know, don't get too close because we're going to get burned. Don't go too close because you know what's going to happen. You don't get too close into this because you're going to lose yourself and your identity. So knowing
Mhm.
that somebody has already walked that path, just because you give that as a feedback doesn't mean that you're being met with resistance, or you're not coachable, or you're just not embracing the challenge of who you could be. Right. So sometimes we get that
Yeah.
narrative, and I just wanted to share that because there's a lot of stuff that I've heard and a
Yeah.
lot of stuff that I have been experienced too. And rightfully so, there may have been a time when I may have pushed somebody out there. So I'm going to pull that back and say, hey, listen, I was just coming from a place of intention, love, and meant the best. However, you have to know where you lie, like in that limit. And there is no such thing as being limitless. We all have a limit.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a finite amount of time and energy in each day. So you have to know yourself. You have to know where you're headed. You know, these heart issues can interfere with us knowing ourselves, because now we've got all these messages, we've got all these things, the ghosts we're trying to outrun, the labels we're trying to disprove or whatever, you know, but and it's so interesting that you brought that up. I actually have a workbook. It's on my website. We haven't even talked about this.
No, we got lots to talk about. I told you guys we got a lot to unpack.
I have this workbook that's about developing your own personal constitution. And I use that. That's one of the weeks in a coaching program that I have for women that are rebuilding their lives after narcissistic abuse. It's called Cinderella No More. But I have this particular workbook available completely separate. It's on my website. It's just a free download. And one of the exercises in this workbook is you're identifying your values, and then you're quantifying and defining that value for yourself, you know, numbering them in order of priority for yourself. And then as part of the quantifying that it's really your value, I've got all these questions that you work through to ask yourself, is this my value? Is it a value that I think I should have, or someone else told me I should have, or do I hear someone else's voice in my head, you know, saying that this is how things should be, or how you should be, or how you should live your life, or whatever. But just really coming out and defining that for yourself. And then it all wraps up by you write a paragraph or so of, this is my personal constitution, which is sort of the frameworks, the stake in the sand of who I am. Just like we have, you know, here in the US, we have a constitution that defines us as a republic. You know, it doesn't dictate every little thing in our lives, but it just says these are the core tenets that, you know, we stand on. And so we need to have that in our own life. And so many times we don't even think to do that. We just sort of, you know, go with the flow of maybe something we picked up from our parents or whatever, but we've never really challenged ourselves to think through, what are the values that I hold dear? And what are the ones that are most important to me? And, you know, none of the values are wrong. And certain values, like how you define it, Rachel, might be different how I define it. So that's why you have to, you know yourself. And that's just part of that process of just rediscovering who you are, especially after you've been through tough stuff. You know, you have to go through that self-discovery process all over again, because you've been changed by what you went through, you know?
Very much so. Yeah. And I thought that was unique because as I was going through that experience, it just kind of gave me this aha. And it's like, wait a minute, I don't want to become somebody that I'm not. And those, you know, those people are pushing, you know, like I said, their intention may be good, but they don't realize the damage could be detrimental to somebody's identity and their own self-belief. And then, you know, what happens when we start becoming somebody else is that we're met with, you know, resentment and a hardened heart. And we feel like just angry at the world, because it's like we haven't been able to express openly who we are, but yet we also haven't had an opportunity to discover and become who we are. And so I give somebody pause there when this is happening in your life to really take a moment to ask yourself, is this truly who I am? And that's a question that, you know, to be honest, could be very hard for anyone to answer, because I remember I was met with that question several years back, a long time ago. And somebody asked, well, who are you? And I said, what do you mean? Who am I? I'm Rachel. And they're like, but who are you? Tell me more about you. And it was just immediately either led in with my job title, or it started with I am not. And so because the truth was, I didn't know who I was, because I was shaped and shifted and molded by other people's beliefs, opinions, thoughts, things that were done to me, for me, all these things. And so I had really lost who Rachel is to the core, that it's like, yeah, great question. I have no idea. But now that you brought that to light, I have some work to do. Let me get back to you. And that was really the journey that unfolded for me to discover who I am at the core, but also, you know, what is my life's mission? What am I here for? Because there's more to it just than owning your identity. It's also your life's work. Like, what are you here on this earth for? Like, we're here and we don't know the set time, and we're not promised anything. So the more that really shined into like, wow, life is so fragile and so short. I want to make sure that every day I give it my best. But then again, Rachel, what is the best? And so I start asking myself these questions, and that really became something as a, as a guide for me, because I got to learn about me. I got to understand what my values are, my beliefs, what is important to me, what I'm willing to negotiate, and what are my boundaries? Who do I imagine myself hanging out with in the future? Are they the same people that I'm at now? And start really questioning and kind of unpacking it all. And to be honest, it was a journey, truly is. And to be honest, still is. And
yes,
that's,
I agree totally. It's a progressive revelation.
exactly. And what's really cool about this, and this is something that just really just took the, icing on the cake kind of thing, is like, we go through this life thinking that this is a journey to this destination. But the beautiful thing is that what if it's not about the destination, but the journey that is the destination?
I am
Wow.
in total agreement with you. Absolutely.
Right.
It's the journey
we'll never
that is the
arrive.
success. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally. I love it.
Yes. And so obviously, just sharing a little bit more about that to put this into context, because those who have been in this space or have read my book or, gone through these courses and programs that we have as well, I really wanted to shine light. It's like, I've been there. In fact, I wasn't there just once or twice. I'm always there. I'm always there, because every day I'm like, what can I learn? What can I do? How was yesterday? And I measure that based off of, performance, because I want to show up as my best, but every day is not always going to be the best of your best.
Right. We're not robots.
Exactly. And it's a beautiful thing, because when you look back, and now it's like going back to the beginning when you talked about leadership, and it's about, if you've overcome this, now you can help others navigate on their journey and just guide them, be a part of something that is experiential, but also giving that person sometimes like that accountability double, knowing that somebody's there side by side and that they're not going to land on their own and, be left for, to pick themselves up. But there's other people that have been there, have walked similar paths, and really are there rooting and guiding with you, because they knew what it was like to try to walk this alone and on their own.
For sure. I agree with you 100%. Yeah. There's another big issue that feeds into all this. It can distort our identity. It can add to the hurts. And it's the issue of unmet needs, emotional needs. Because when certain needs go unmet, then it can leave us feeling like, what's wrong with me? And it can leave us angry. It can have all kinds of negative things. And when needs are met in healthy ways, it's like a cup of fresh water that it just sort of refreshes your soul and encourages you and uplifts you. And then you can push forward. And so I've noticed a lot of people don't stop to think about your needs, emotional needs. I'm not even talking about physical needs, but just your emotional needs. And I'll just rattle through a quick list of these, just to put a label on it and give legitimacy to this. Because as women, a lot of times we feel like this has been sort of purged out of us in some way, to acknowledge it. Like, we're not strong if we have needs. Needs make me weak, emotional needs. I need to overcome this sort of thing. And it's not, there's nothing wrong with you embracing these needs. And if you don't, you're wounding your own soul in doing this. But we get caught up in this narrative that I'm too much and not enough at the same time. So I'm too needy, I'm too this, I'm too that, or I'm not enough of this. I should be stronger. I should be whatever. And so things like attention, acceptance, respect, worth, your sense of value, appreciation, where you feel appreciated by others, belonging, that sense of belonging, our identity, and that we feel comfortable in our own skin. Achievement is an emotional need that we have. Nobody wants to sit there stagnant in their life. And if they say they do, that's usually a reflection of woundedness, that they're afraid to step up, or they're so discouraged that they've given up and said, I won't have any expectation there, and a sense of security in our lives. And it doesn't make us weak to have these needs. The strongest women are the ones who acknowledge this and seek out healthy ways of meeting these needs. You don't get every single need met every week, but over the course of a month or 6 months or whatever, you should be able to look back and feel filled up and whole in each of these areas, and sometimes we need to go directly to God. And that's where we get that need met. Sometimes we go to girlfriends, and sometimes there's other places in our life, but we need this. And the problem is, if we don't give these needs the voice that they want to have, because they're going to have a voice, they're going to drive us in one form or another. And we can acknowledge that, we could ignore it, but it's there. It doesn't go away. And so as a leader, for example, if we have certain needs that are unmet, if we start looking to our team to meet these needs, then we're in trouble. These needs are legitimate, but we're really meant, if we do this in proper order in the healthiest way, then we're meant to fill our own bucket first, ideally in relationship with God, and then other healthy peer relationships. Our spouse factors in. No one person has the capacity to meet all these needs, including our spouse. And when push comes to shove, we are responsible for our own needs and the way they get met. And when we do this, now we're free to lead from a way that we're actually serving and guiding the team, that we're pouring into individuals. We're not leading from a position of lack or insecurity. Again, that fear that steps in. If you combine the fears and the hurts with unmet needs, that is a recipe for disaster as a leader. That's where we can wind up, falling face first on the sidewalk, from a leadership standpoint, and really screwing ourselves up. We can wind up hurting others when we don't need to. And we're easily manipulated by others too. So we're really not leading, we're being reactionary in what we're doing, so our team is never meant to meet our needs. They can be supportive and we can appreciate, their appreciation of us or whatever it is. But if our bucket is not full, if we're looking to our team for that, then again, that is a recipe for a hot mess.
Yeah. Very true with the needs being unmet. I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes we don't talk about the emotions, which that's what happened. It's growing up. We didn't talk about emotions. So we just buried them and stuffed them down. And, you just turned to different coping mechanisms, and they weren't always healthy ones. But to your point, this is so true. Like, how many of us are actually getting our needs met? And, when we start looking, first of all, for context, it's not so much about somebody else needs to fill those. It's sometimes we need to be responsible and fill those as well. Like understanding our identity, right? I mean, we have our identity in our creator, but yet what does that look like on the ground floor? Like we're here on this earth. Like we have to make sure we align with that to, also, achievement was a big thing too, for me, I think, because achievement meant, oh, she's just only looking out for like a personal thing. Like, was it like a personal goal? Whereas like now when I look at achievement, it's like, no, we're setting up for success for the long haul, because other people are going to be using it or, benefiting from it. And so achievement can have somewhat of a negative connotation, or maybe that's just my, the way I was, brought up. And so sometimes when we look at these needs, we have to ask ourselves, what is our belief around it too? How does it resonate with us? How have we, giving meaning to that? But also to question it even further is, for the needs that we need, how are we doing so for others? So I feel like living and leading by that example. So if we want attention, are we noticing other people? Are we giving them praise and attention too? And mind you, we might only have that 10% to give, but are we giving some part of it?
Right.
Are we, giving that respect that we so much admire? Same thing with like love. It's like, we want love, but are we giving love? We want to be appreciated, but are we appreciating others? We want to belong, but are we including others in our space and making them feel warm and welcome and belonging? So it always kind of goes twofold. And so even though it's like, let's just say you come to this table with like zeros in these buckets and these, bank accounts of emotional bank accounts, right? So we can't expect so much for somebody to always pour into us, but yet there is something that we can do as individuals to help at least pour little bits in there, and we're sprinkling it in there. And the more we sprinkle out, is kind of like the seed scattering. So it will always come back, tenfold, but question whose needs are not being met. It's kind of, the same thing. If we want to be of service, we have to serve. If we want, again, love, we have to give love. So how are we showing up in these areas? And I think that that's an important piece to note as well.
Right. And, just to take this like 3 levels deeper than what we were just talking, I agree with you totally on everything. but there's like a cautionary thing in the middle of that, because if we're not careful, we can start doing that out of a people pleasing mode, which again is just reflecting back on woundedness and our own heart. So ideally giving this, that we don't feel like we have to completely meet someone's need in an area. But I love what you said about, the sprinkling the seeds and everything, because if we can just be thoughtful to someone else and just say, thank you so much. You just did such and such, and that was really a help. Or thank you for the example that you just set. That was inspirational to me, and I really appreciate that. Just all those little things. For one thing, it gets us outside of ourselves from our own navel gazing. But what we don't want to do is start doing all that sort of thing, because our motive is we're looking for that to be reciprocated and get back to us out of our empty bucket. Out of, I don't even know if I'm explaining this correctly, but out of that, like, we're driven to do that, because the people pleasing is fear-based as well. And so when we want to give in this way, it's because we're not expecting, we're not demanding it to be returned to us. But when we do it from the right heart, it does come back to us, and it is affirming and it is uplifting. But our motivation is not, I'm looking for something from you, so I'm going to manipulate you emotionally in this way to get what I need from it. So that's just, I know that's not what you meant at all, but I just want to put that little caveat on there just as a caution that, we all need to check ourselves in that times.
But I'm glad you did, because I actually brought up a point, because obviously I was, recovering perfectionist, former people pleaser. I was that person, but and that's the thing, I would do it out of the kindness of my heart. But then when I realized that I wasn't getting anything in return, and I don't say that necessarily in a way of manipulation or control in that aspect, but we become resentful. It's like, why do we keep just, knocking at the door and somebody opens up and you're just giving, because maybe somebody's behind that closed door because they're going through something. You're like, I just want to be kind and thoughtful and just love on them. But then it's like, you don't even get a thank you. You don't even get an acknowledgement. And you're just kind of like, oh, right. It just kind of, it defeats that giver's heart. And you're like, why do I do this? And then sometimes I got to go talk to God about it. I'm like, why'd you give me such a huge heart to give away when these people are just taking me for granted? Or, these are some of the narratives that you could talk yourself into, because that helps, empower somebody to harden their heart for all the wrong reason. And I don't want somebody to do that, because I was there and it was terrible and it was awful. But being mindful of that as well. So almost, obviously in scripture, guard your heart, right? So that's what we got to do. So if we realize that we still keep going to the same person, expecting a different result, then we now know to pull back and just say, I'm going to love you from afar, because that's a form of boundary setting too. And so you can still give without the expectation of return. And you have to sometimes close that door on an expectation of return.
Right. And totally. And I so relate to what you're saying about recognizing yourself, because I remember as a young leader doing that very thing. And that's why I'm so aware of this. Because again, when we've walked through this stuff, then we can speak with authority into it. And when we get on the other side of it, and we can spot it in ourselves and others so much better. And I remember I was leading this group and then had some other people there. And I remember getting really ticked off and just resenting them, because I felt like I am pouring out and I'm pouring out and I'm pouring out, and I'm getting nothing back here from that. And until it finally hit me, it's not their job to pour back into me. I'm here to serve them. And I'm like barking up the wrong tree. My needs are legitimate, but I need to go to peer groups, not to those that I'm leading. So I have to seek out the right sources of that. And I wasn't going to God first with that, and so yeah. So, I mean, we all do this,
We do. And that's why I think it's important to kind of check ourselves, check in and check ourselves too, right? That's what self-awareness is. It's really such a beautiful gift when you can give that back to yourself, because you can see things from different perspectives and be able to kind of step outside of your motives and understand it. Be like, yeah, I know the intention was there, but how are you showing up? Was it being delivered in that way? And so recognizing that. And so sometimes we just have to, check ourselves and correct course as needed. And then there's also times that there's a time and place to pour, Like you said, I might be pouring into a group that I'm leading. However, I'll go to my peers to get filled back up. And so it's that cycle of
Exactly.
understanding. So you give and fill. And so, obviously I mentioned one of the things that I think is something we wear on our heart if we don't check ourselves, and that could be resentment and
Yes,
feeling that anger, bitterness, resentment, and that can also lead to unforgiveness.
absolutely.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I'd
this
love
is
to
a big
hear
area.
I'd love to hear
Mhm.
your expertise on this because, oh, how well I know that area. But I'm
Oh
not the
yeah,
expert.
we've all
I'm
walked
just a
this.
personal expert on that end.
Yep, yep. And the resentments thing, it's usually not, like we can those first couple of issues and all the symptoms of it, that's usually the stuff that happens first. And then if it's not dealt with in a healthy way, that's where the issues are compounded with these resentments, because this resentment, anger and resentment are usually secondary emotions.
Mm-hmm.
They're a symptom of some other hurt and wound. And it shows up, like, for example, we can be really judgy towards other people, have that critical spirit. We can direct this at ourselves sometimes too, and have unrealistic expectations of ourselves. And hand in hand, we have unrealistic expectations of others, which it makes it feel that we're being demanding of other people, even if we don't mean to, because there's still fear lingering. And when it ties in with resentments, we can be blaming, we can scapegoat on other people because we don't want something pinned on us. So of course that will really negatively affect our leadership because we're not taking personal responsibility. If we start blaming the team for something that they made me look bad or whatever, and the obvious things like having a short fuse, things that pop out of our mouth that other people feel as being disrespected, and you can really tell if you're super brave and you're leading a team or whatever, you can go and ask them, do you feel comfortable making a mistake around me? And if they feel like they can't do anything right, then that's not their problem, that's our problem, that we have to deal with. So if we see some of these things within ourselves, again, that's like the first layer, the first layer of the onion, the crusty layer.
Yeah.
Of the onion, that we have to deal with that and get to what's underneath that to really resolve it. Again, this is not something that we just white knuckle and say, I'm not going to do this anymore. There's a reason we're doing it, and it usually flows from the heart. Unfortunately, if we've done it long enough, then there can be some habitual thinking patterns as well, but that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah. I mean, you make some really great points there as well. And so it's, the resentment comes as a secondary and, to that point of having unmet needs. And so we become resentful of those individuals that, similar to what I was just sharing about former people pleasing, until, I had to really take a look at what was going on as well. And so then you just kind of pull that back into your own space and recognize it so you can make those changes moving forward. And so I know that we talked, at great lengths of all kinds of just issues that lead from the one major thing which is like anxiety and fear, right? And so how it spirals out of control into our areas of our life, to how it emotionally makes us feel, to the secondary issues of feeling just resentment, bitterness, anger, unforgiveness. And we become this like absorption of all the negative that has happened to us. But I know that on the flip side, there's a way that we can, again, employ ourselves to take accountability and personal responsibility and start flipping the script on that and start using them for our advantage. And like, this is what we do, we've gone through some hardships. And so now it's like, I never want somebody else to feel the pain that I went through. So this has been my life's work, is to, help that individual in some way that I can. And I know that we had talked about some of the other ways that we can build up some of those strategies or some of those strategy takeaways. And I know that you have some beautiful resources, as well as some of the other strategies that I know that you're waiting to share here as well. So
Yeah.
I know before, as we kind of come up on time, I just wanted to leave a few moments there to really discuss some additional strategies and takeaways that we have yet not covered.
Right. Absolutely. So really what we've covered is just coming into awareness of this stuff. That's half the battle right there. And I've got a workbook even that I've put together that addresses these three key areas that we talked about. And it is focused on gaining awareness, because sometimes just being aware and tracking ourselves. So this tool that I've created in this workbook, it's a way to track yourself in these individual areas, not for the purpose of self-condemnation, but for the purpose of awareness. And that alone can start to prick us with changes. Because in this workbook, like one of the things is walking you through tracking symptoms on a positive or negative side of, if you're displaying this here or here, what does that look like? And just like every day, after like the first 10 days of doing this, this is like less than 10 minutes, first thing in the morning that you do it. And just that alone, I have seen people change or begin seeing tangible changes in themselves because they have this continual awareness. So throughout the day, they start catching themselves, you know, in the way they're thinking or in the way they're responding or whatever. But what I always tell women is, you know, pass through that first. And then the way I've got it set up, it's just a matter of you darken the box if you're on the negative side, you put a check mark if you're on the positive side. And so after the first 10 days, or maybe the second 10 days, you look to see where are the patterns remaining, because that's the indicator that it's more than just a cognitive awareness to change behavior of maybe habitual patterns. Now we can point out specifically, here's the heart issues that are underlying it. Here's the symptoms pointing to a heart issue in this area. You know, so it's a really helpful self-diagnostic tool as well, because when you start to see that there's certain patterns, no matter how aware I am, the pattern remains, then that says, okay, I've got something that now I can go to a coach and I can sit down and work with this, and we can dig into these issues and work on the emotional healing. You know, there's tools. I've got tools for that. And the renewing of the mind, like changing self-defeating thinking patterns or lies we're believing about ourselves that we've come into agreement with. And that seems perfectly normal. We don't even challenge those assumptions. And also incorporating the things like self-care and lifestyle changes. So you actually make a plan. You're not just flying by the seat of your pants all the time. And, you know, that gracious accountability that comes along with coaching. You can't get enough of that. We all need that. You know, I reach out, I get coaching in my life for different things. And I in turn a coach that specializes in certain areas. And with this workbook, once you pass through like the first level of housekeeping that you do, like clean up on aisle 13 of what we're dealing with,
Yes.
you know, then we need to keep short accounts, because there's going to be other things in the future. So we need to have the tools in our tool belt to know how to deal with this stuff. So we're not stuffing it and just putting ourselves right back into that same position again. So we need to have an ongoing process of self-inventory. So I always recommend like using this workbook and do like three cycles of that in a row. So that would be like 30 days. Because once you've got the workbook downloaded, you can just keep, you know, repeating it. You can reprint it and go through it again. And then as you're working on deeper changes in yourself, maybe once every 3 to 6 months, go through another 10-day cycle again and just like check yourself, call things into awareness and just see where you're at. It's also really cool to look back at where you started and to see where you are now, you know, because our growth, sometimes we don't even acknowledge it to ourselves because it's so subtle and so gradual. But when you go back and look at something and realize that you have really transformed, and that is so affirming and encouraging to keep going in that mode.
I love that you just brought that up, because I was just pulling up one of my favorite quotes and I just wanted to share this. And it's by C.S. Lewis. And it says, "Isn't it funny how day by day, nothing changes, but when we look back, everything is different."
So true.
It's such a beautiful reminder that just keep moving forward, one foot in front of the other. And, you know, when we feel like we're not making progress day in, day out, as Annette just said, you know, you do this process, you look back and you're like, wow, look at how far I've come. And that's something to celebrate and give yourself praise over, because you know what, we're all stuck at some point in our lives. And it's like, how cool is it when we can look back and be like, yeah, I did it. And I can keep doing it. And it helps build your esteem. It helps build your confidence. And that's what we're all about. It's like, we got to do the healing. We got to face the past. We got to overcome the situations and hurdles and things that are kind of, in this present moment. But there's good news. There's hope. There's light.
Very much.
And there's encouragement to keep going. And then as you go through this journey, it's such a beautiful gift when you could give that back to somebody who's just like you, who needed somebody like you at that time and season in their life. So you have been incredible, over delivered, as I knew, because like you said, our 5-minute warm up turned into a 45-minute conversation that has just been, I'm wowed. I'm enamored to just be here and just, soak this in, but also for your time and your presence here. And you graciously gifted our listeners with a workbook as well, which all of this stuff will be included in your show notes. But one last thing, how could people find out more about you and follow along with you and your work that you do?
Yeah. If you go to my website, AnnetteChesney.com, is a website. I've got a podcast out that actually deals with healing and rebuilding your life after narcissistic abuse. Well, I won't say this. I'm talking with someone. There might be a second one coming in a little different vein, but I have all kinds of resources. A lot of them are free downloads. And then I have different programs, coaching programs, and I'm not short on resources. That's for sure. So, and if there's something if you've got questions or something you want to talk about, you can contact me through my website as well, AnnetteChesney.com. And I'll be glad to chat with you, about that. You've got questions about what we talked about here today or whatever, but this has just been phenomenal. I so appreciate being able to be here and talk with you, Rachel. And I just felt like we were just kindred spirits, like there's so many issues that we're just on the same page with and just some similar experiences in some way. So this has just been a joy to be able to be here with you.
Yes, likewise. Again, thank you for your time, and be sure to check the show notes for everything, the links, the workbook, how to get in touch with Annette, and, give her podcast a listen as well, because you know what, sometimes you'd be surprised at what you don't know until you uncover and discover, and you're like, wow. And sometimes that's kind of the eye-opening moment when things really start to fall in place, because now, again, awareness is key. And so it brings clarity and it helps boost that confidence. And so again, incredible. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey there. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the Confident Woman Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did, please be sure to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. Thanks again for listening.